Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mentoring Moments. I'm here with Ashley again in one of our 2 weekly mentorship sessions, and she brought up something that I thought was pretty useful for those out there going through a similar sort of startup journey as what she's going through. And she's just about ready to set up her Shopify website because she's going to start out, she's manufacturing a product and she wants to sell it direct to consumer. And so she's going to initially do that through Shopify. And basically she's going through that whole trial and tribulation that lots of people go through when they're in startup phase. Do I try to set up my Shopify site myself? Do I hire a developer? Do I hire a freelancer? Which direction do I go? And because she wants to set up a subscription-based plan for her product because it's a consumable product, she's looking at recharge and some form of subscription model. And there's several different subscription apps out there for Shopify. I won't give my opinion too much on that one right now. I do have some strong opinions on which subscription apps I think work better than others because some do things better than others. They've all got their strengths and weaknesses, but I've worked with almost all of them over the years and some are better than others. But basically, you want to set up a new Shopify website. You want to have probably a premium paid theme, and you want to set up subscriptions on it. And at the moment, you will start out with one SKU and one SKU only, and that will be purchased on a subscription basis. And so you were thinking, man, I'm getting quotes out there from agencies to help me set up the site with a premium theme, get subscriptions up and running. And we're getting quotes that range anywhere from $5,000 to $35,000 and everything in between and running the gamut. And your kind of question was, how can we have such a wide range of quotes for essentially what is the same body of work? And then secondarily, should I be doing this myself? Because Shopify is a pretty straightforward platform and it's pretty easy. But then on the flip side of that, you were saying, I'm concerned about screwing something up irretrievably. And what the first thing that I would say is that it's absolutely impossible to screw up things irretrievably in the Shopify world. It's just impossible. It's a SaaS platform. And worst case scenario, you re-download the theme, you reinstall the theme, and it blows out all the theme components. If you screw up a section or you screw up something from a design perspective or anything else, it's very easy to reload the theme. And then effectively, you're starting from a reasonably clean sheet of paper. About the only time that you can run into a little bit of trouble, and again, this is not irretrievable or unfixable, is that if you install a bunch of apps and then you end up uninstalling those apps, they can leave a bit of cruft behind. It won't necessarily install all of the theme impact components. It will uninstall the functional components of the app, but it won't necessarily uninstall everything that it did to the theme from a functional perspective and from a UI perspective. And so there may be some instances where you'll want some help to go in there and identify and clean out the cruft, or once again, start from scratch and basically install the theme again from scratch. And then you're starting from a clean sheet of paper. And so my first piece of advice is don't worry with Shopify that you're going to screw up something, that you're going to break something. It's not like a Magento, or it's not like other self-hosted platforms where when you start making changes to code, you're oftentimes changing back-end code. And that's very much more difficult to fix than front-end code. So you're really only playing with front-end code when you're installing a theme or you're updating a section within a theme, you're loading content, you're loading images, you're loading blog pages, you're loading info pages, you're doing all that. You're really just using default Shopify functionality with the theme and the user experience layered over top of it. And if you were talking about super custom functionality that only an agency would build using Shopify script or Flow or custom JavaScript or custom CSS or something like that's a different kettle of fish, but that's not what you would be doing. You're talking about installing a theme, installing a couple of apps, and loading your product and getting up and running. So really, you don't have the ability, you don't have the skill to screw up the platform because there's pieces that you will never, ever access. The parts that would quote unquote screw it up more, you won't be manually modifying theme files, for example. And so as a result of that, there's nothing really you can break. And going beyond that, I would say that you're at a stage when you're a startup, you don't really need nor can you afford a proper agency. So that's the challenge that you're running into, is that as a startup, when I was running the last agency that I ran, Our absolute minimum build on Shopify, minimum, was 50 grand. That was the smallest build we ever did. And then they would go up to 300K from there. So 50 to 300K was the average budget for a Shopify build. And most of those were Shopify Plus builds because they were larger retailers that needed heavy customization, systems integration, 20 apps, full custom theme, the whole 9 yards. And so why you're probably getting the range that you're getting is because you're an unknown quantity because you're a startup. They don't know how demanding you're going to be. They don't know unless they go into a full scoping exercise with you, unless they go into a full discovery with you, they don't know what you're going to want. And so it's like they're trying to, stick their finger in the air and go, based on this very limited brief that we've been given, we're going to give ourselves a buffer to protect ourselves from the downside risk of what this person is going to expect at the end of the day. If you want to go down, quote unquote, the agency path, as a startup, my recommendation would be to find a Shopify freelancer, not an agency, a single person, a single Shopify developer that's maybe working from home, and they're a freelancer and they work on Upwork, they work on different basically freelancer platforms, and they list their services on freelancer platforms. Or you could put up on a LinkedIn post that says, hey, I'm looking for a good Shopify freelancer. Do you know of anybody that you trust or that you've worked with before? And that's probably a better fit because they can work on an ad hoc basis, like an hourly rate basis with you, as opposed to agencies want to work on a project basis with you, right? And so they want to go, okay, here's a nice tidy little project with a nice tidy little scope and a nice tidy little, here's the deliverables, here's what success looks like for this project. We can put a nice little package around it, and then we can get her into a retainer on an ongoing basis, and we can make money off her on the long term. Because agencies, to be sustainable, they want to get you on a retainer as fast as possible. But the reality is, as a startup, you're not ready for a retainer and you've got one SKU. If you had 1,000 SKU catalog, it would probably be a different story. But the reality is, even from integrating into the back office perspective, let's say you decide to run Xero for your financials or QuickBooks or whatever it is, A2X will be able to get you up and running quickly, or you could use something like make.com to do a out-of-the-box integration between Shopify and your accounting package, or you could do it manually until you get to a place where it starts to become untenable to make those transactions roll up into Xero or QuickBooks or whatever you're using. So I guess my advice would be do it yourself, and if you run into trouble, then get a freelancer to help you. And at the same time, they are actually doing the work. I would be on a conference call with them. I would be recording the conference call, and I would be getting knowledge transfer from that freelancer to me so that I know what they're doing. I know how they're doing it, and I'm actually learning through the process. That would be my recommendation, because as a startup, you want to be doing absolutely as much as you possibly can for yourself so that when you get bigger and you are ready to take on an agency, then you know the questions to ask, know whether what they're charging you is realistic and fair, what's involved, how to give better briefs. You know a whole lot more things, which means you can manage those outsourced resources better. For example, if I was going into, let's just say hypothetically, I needed to build an e-commerce Shopify site, right? I could architect it, but I would still need because I'm not a developer, I would still need an agency to build it. But I would be able to vet their proposals because I've vetted hundreds of them over the years. And so I know what's reasonable. If they're estimating 1,000 hours and I know that the scope of work should be more like the 600 to 700 hours, then I can call them on that and say, can you help clarify why we think we're at this point? Because based on the scope of work that I've provided in a BRD, a business requirements document, it doesn't look like that much work. Or if I know that this is a 1,500-hour project and they estimate 1,600 hours, then I won't question it because I'll be like, we're in the ballpark. We're where we need to be. And then I can negotiate on, was this going to be a time and materials project? Is this going to be a fixed price project? Is it going to be fixed price for certain components, but time and materials for others that are highly custom and they haven't done that work before? There's that whole discussion, that whole commercial discussion that needs to happen. And unless you're from the industry, it's very difficult to have those discussions in a really informed way that is credible and is puts you in a position of leverage to negotiate with the agency. But because your project is so small, it's so low value, it's high risk for them because they've never worked with you before. You're a startup, which means in their mind, you've got no money. And so therefore, you potentially even going to struggle to pay. Even for $5,000 worth of work, you may struggle to pay. Just like I'm thinking of it from the agency perspective. If you came to me when I was still running my agency, I probably would have just simply suggested to you, like we targeted merchants that were doing minimum of 20 million GMV, like our ICP, was merchants that were doing like $20 million GMV per year or above, because we knew that our pricing model didn't work for small businesses. We worked for medium businesses and larger because we had 30 devs and the whole 9 yards. And so we were a very professional agency. And so they had me doing solution architecture and discovery and all that stuff. And so when you've got high caliber people in your agency that are doing high caliber projects 99% of the time, for them to come down and work on these tiny little pieces of work that are fairly small, that becomes difficult for agencies to digest. But they want to let you down nicely. They don't want to just flat out say no. So also another thing that I think you're seeing the result of is they're just trying to price you out of proceeding with them. But they're saying, well, if she does proceed, we're going to make a killing on this. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying the agency's done this, but I've seen this before. And so the agency, for example, that maybe has estimated 30 grand to install a theme, a paid premium theme, install the Recharge app, configure the app, get your single SKU loaded into the site as a subscription product, test and deploy. The ones that are estimating $30,000 for that, I would say most likely they simply are trying to price you out of going ahead with them, because that's probably not the type of project that they would want to take on. They want to take on a big project, a halo project with a well-known brand for that same 30 grand. I said all that to say that as a startup, you want to try to do it yourself, because the more you know, the better you'll be. If you get stuck, hire a freelancer that can not only help you, but also train you and upskill you at the same time, so that you feel a little bit more empowered to own and maintain your web experience as a startup. That would be my recommendation. Does that kind of align with sort of the sense that you had after talking to all these different agencies?
Yeah, for sure. But it's wishful thinking. I wish people would have just said our minimum project dollar amount is X. And
Yeah.
I got to the point where I interviewed a handful of agencies. And towards the end, I was just like, what's your minimum project amount that you'll take on? And because ours is super simple, it's an MVP. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. So I just wish it could have been a little bit smoother sailing. But I think you're right. I have experience in Shopify and the subscription product. So, yeah. I just don't want to
got to
screw it
back
up.
yourself, right? I think, like I said, you can't. There's nothing that can't be fixed. There's nothing that can't be undone. There's nothing that is so irretrievable that the theme reinstall and some uninstallation of a couple of apps that you may want to use, that's pretty much as simple as it gets. That's the whole point of Shopify. Shopify is the unbreakable platform, and it's designed all the way from startups with one SKU all the way up to $100 million a year businesses that are D2C, B2C, and want to be headless, but they want to be using Shopify as their backend, somebody like Gymshark. And it's designed to cater for everything in between. And with 8,000 apps in the app ecosystem, there's an app to do just about everything. So my recommendation would be try it yourself, get stuck, find a freelancer that can help, find a freelancer that can come in and make some tweaks, some final tweaks. If you can't make all the tweaks that you want to make, hire a freelancer on an hourly rate basis. It's probably going to be $50 an hour, something like that. Most freelancers are between 40 and $80 an hour USD for Shopify, and except for the very, very well-known freelancers that may charge $150 an hour or whatever. And then you bring them in on an ad hoc basis. Maybe you buy a block of hours from them, or maybe you set aside a block of hours with them. You sit down beside them and you literally step them through what you want piece by piece, because you're not even at a place where you can document what an MVP means for you. And that's another thing that I'll point out. When you say, hey, look, I'm looking at building an MVP, for every business, MVP means something different. And so if a business has been on Shopify for 5 years and they're doing a replatform, or let's say they've been on another platform for 5 years and they're replatforming to Shopify, what they consider an MVP functionally is very different to what you will consider an MVP. And so whenever I hear somebody say MVP when they came into the agency, it was like, okay, that's great. That's cool that you're focused on an MVP, but what does that mean for you? So for example, when I was working for the last company that I worked for as an e-commerce manager, they had been doing e-commerce for, I think, 15 years before I came to the business. And when I got to the business, one of my first big projects was to re-platform them off of Magento 1 onto BigCommerce Enterprise. And so they even internally were using the term MVP. And I'm going, hang on a second, guys. It's difficult to use because they had already been on 2 other e-commerce platforms previously. So this was like their third re-platform project over the last 15 years. And I was like, what an MVP is for this business is like so far ahead. It was a multi-$100,000 project, right? And yeah, it's great that we're focusing on MVP internally, but what that means is different for every single business operating in different verticals and at different stages of their business life cycle. This business was already doing tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue, and that was all online. And again, what their MVP and what their expectation of an MVP was is totally different to somebody who's a startup. So those are the key things I just would suggest you bear in mind. And until you're at a place where you can go with a really clear BRD, business requirements document, and hand that over to an agency or work with a consultant. So for example, there's quite a few larger businesses that they themselves can't document their own internal BRD. And that's where like a consultant or a consultant within an agency will come in and they'll do deep discovery over multiple days, and they'll do discovery across every department in the business and every single function in the business. They'll document each department, and especially each department lead will have kind of their different expectations of what the website should do and deliver and be. And so until you collect and collate all that information and filter it down into a clearly defined set of deliverables and help them identify what their requirements are, because businesses oftentimes are really bad at identifying what their requirements are before you can even discover them. So they go, how do we do that? How do we arrive at our list of requirements? How do we do that as a business? Because they may have done it once or twice before with a replatform, but it's not their bread and butter. It's not what they do every single day. And so by going through a structured set, there's about 400 questions in my discovery document that I work through with brands for e-commerce projects. There's 8 tabs in a spreadsheet with 400 questions. And the reason why that is, now, not all of those questions will apply to every project, but what it does do when I share it with a client before I actually get into discovery, because what I'll do is I'll share it like 2 weeks before we go into our formal discovery session, and I'll ask them to complete as many of those questions as possible before we ever get to the discovery, so that they start thinking someone doing discovery like a business analyst. Right? And so they start to think, oh my God, you're right. We didn't think of that. Oh, you're right. We didn't think of that. Oh, that's right. We do run that system. Oh, that's right. For logistics, we integrate with that carrier aggregator. Oh, that's right. We have an integration with this POS system over here. We don't really know how it works, but it's integrated and the orders come down to our ERP and inventory goes up from our ERP to the POS somehow. We don't really know how. So these types of questions, they really get the creative juices flowing within the business so that nothing critical gets missed during the discovery process. And so this is the type of thing where these agencies will have a similar discovery process most likely. And when they hear your initial brief, your verbal brief, or maybe an email brief that's 2 paragraphs long, they're going, well, do we really need to go through a 2-day discovery with this person? Because it doesn't sound like we need to, but who knows? Once we get into discovery, maybe there's more to this than what we think. So let's put a big buffer in there just in case.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's smart. But yeah.
So in a nutshell, do it yourself, get stuck, get a freelancer, help you fix it, knowledge transfer, be a boss.
Cool. I can do that.
Exactly. I know you can. That's why I said it. If I didn't think you could do it, I wouldn't have suggested that. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're having this conversation. Because 9 times out of 10, I don't know if you've noticed, but 9 times out of 10, and this is a message for everyone else out there who's doubting themselves, 9 times out of 10, all I'm doing is validating what you already know to be the right answer. And all I'm doing is giving you the courage to execute on what you know you need to do anyway. And so really, you're bringing these list of questions, but they're not really questions. It's more, I know what I need to do, but I'm waiting for Jason to validate that's actually the right approach. To give you the emotional safety net that you can go forward. And hey, I'm happy to be that anytime. That too.
Thank you for being that for me.
But I try to do it. I try to do it as politely as possible. Good stuff, Ashley. Look, I think you're on the right path, and I think you know where to go next, and I think you can keep that $10,000 to $30,000 in your back pocket instead.
Love it. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.